Baik, baik. Saya mewakili Pak Popreja. Selamat datang teman-teman mahasiswa dari Indonesia, dari Malaysia, dari saya kirim ke Makassar juga ada. Selamat join dalam acara sharing session yang dilaksanakan oleh ALC dalam episode ke-391 kalau nggak salah. Karena beliau lagi kurang sehat, sakit, akhirnya saya selaku sekretaris eksekutif ALC, saya mewakili beliau. Salam sehat buat semuanya. Mempersingkat waktu sambil nunggu Bu Yasmin, silakan Pak Iqbal untuk menyampaikan itu apa materinya. Silakan 30 sampai 35 menit.
Oke, baik. Terima kasih banyak-banyak Pak Indah ya, Pak
Gue
Pak
bilang,
Indah. Pak
ya,
Gumilang ya.
ya.
Terima kasih banyak-banyak Pak Gumilang. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat,
Waalaikumsalam.
selamat siang, selamat petang di Malaysia. Hari ini saya saya Dr. Ikmal Hisham Muhammad Tah. Right, saya daripada Fakultas Ilmu Hukum UiTM Malaysia, dan pada hari ini saya akan menyampaikan satu syarahan, is a lecture on rukun negara. Okay. Saya
Oke.
harap suara saya sangat jelas ya, Pak.
Sangat jelas. Clear, clear.
Alright. Okay, thank you, thank you. So pada hari ini saya akan menyampaikan lecture ataupun syarahan berkaitan dengan rukun negara, upholding constitutional supremacy in Malaysia. Dan untuk makluman semua, okay, this lecture will be mix between bahasa Malaysia dan juga English, ya
Ya.
Pak, because
Oke, siap.
ada certain term itu mau saya explain dalam English, right?
Ya.
So
Ya.
when we discuss about rukun negara, or in English we call it as a national pillar, right? So in Malaysia, I think it's same with Indonesia. Indonesia is governed by Pancasila, right? But and also in Malaysia, we are actually governed by Rukun Negara. Rukun Negara ini sama tarafnya dengan Pancasila di Indonesia. Right, jadi sempena dengan Hari Kesaktian Pancasila, ini peluang kepada saya untuk menjelaskan lah serba sedikit tentang pemahaman rukun negara buat rakan-rakan di Indonesia dan juga para pelajar di Malaysia. Okey, ada satu elemen yang ingin saya bicara, saya ingin bagi lecture, ialah berkaitan dengan constitutional supremacy, ataupun di dalam bahasa Malaysia kita panggilnya sebagai keluhuran perlembagaan. Okey, jadi of course saya akan cerita tentang what is rukun negara. Okay, and then what's the concept of constitutional supremacy, and what are the challenges and future and challenges ahead. Okay, what is rukun negara? Right. This is the part of our rukun negara. Right. I just want to explain a bit about this. Kalau kita bicara tentang rukun negara dalam bahasa Malaysia, okay, bahawasanya negara kita Malaysia mendukung cita-cita nak mencapai perpaduan yang lebih erat di kalangan seluruh masyarakatnya, okay, memelihara satu cara hidup demokratik. Ini adalah long preamble pada rukun negara. Mencipta satu masyarakat yang adil di mana kemakmuran negara dapat dinikmati bersama secara adil dan saksama, menjamin satu cara yang liberal terhadap tradisi-tradisi kebudayaannya yang kaya dengan berbagai corak, dan membina satu masyarakat progresif yang menggunakan sains dan teknologi moden. Jadi itu adalah preamble, yang long preamble of our constitution. Okay, maka kami rakyat Malaysia berikrar akan menumpukan seluruh tenaga dan usaha kami untuk mencapai cita-cita tersebut berdasarkan di atas prinsip-prinsip yang berikut. Jadi di Malaysia kita ada 5 prinsip utama rukun negara, iaitu yang pertama, kepercayaan kepada Tuhan, kesetiaan kepada raja dan negara, keluhuran perlembagaan, kedaulatan undang-undang, dan juga kesopanan dan kesusilaan. Jadi ini adalah secara umumnya rukun negara, okey, yang diamalkan, dijadikan satu ideologi kepada negara, terutamanya kepada Malaysia. Right. This is the what we call as the translation in English. Right. Of course, we dedicate to achieve a greater unity for all the people, maintaining democratic way of life, creating a just society, and wealth of the nation shall be equitably shared to ensure liberal approach. Recently, the word liberal has become so controversial in Malaysia. Okay, because some quarter of people they say liberal it represent the another side or another interpretation of Islam liberal. That's what according to some people say, but that's wrong interpretation because here our rukun negara they talk about to ensure a liberal approach to her rich and diverse cultural tradition. Means that here we respect the culture among our nation. Dan Pak Gumilang kalau tidak silap saya di Indonesia kita panggilnya
Namanya aja
sebagai Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, betul ya? Right? Bhinneka Tunggal
Mas.
Ika.
Betul,
Right?
betul.
Ya, di Malaysia kita juga hormat kepada pelbagai kaum, okay, diverse cultural traditions, and then we also focus on progressive society which shall be oriented to modern science and technology. So we need to focus and uphold science and technology to build our country. And of course, we are guided by this principle: believe in God, loyalty to king and country, upholding constitution, and then rule of law, and also the other things, kesopanan and also kesusilaan. I think we missed that. All right. Next. Right? Good behavior and morality. So this is the rukun negara or the pillars of nation to Malaysia. Right? Because of the constraint of time, I think for the lecture, I do believe that we need to focus on the history of rukun negara. Okay, sejarah pembentukan rukun negara di Malaysia. Okey, rukun negara diisytiharkan pada 31 Ogos 1970. Okey, sepenuh ulang tahun kemerdekaan Malaysia yang ke-13 oleh almarhum Yang di-Pertuan Agong Tunku Ismail Nasiruddin Shah, Imam Alam Sultan Zainal Abidin. Okey, dan sudah tentu rukun negara ini diperkenalkan berikut peristiwa pada 13 Mei 1969 yang mengganggu-gugat perpaduan etnik di Malaysia. Okey, so a bit history about history of our rukun negara or our national pillar. It was introduced after the 1969 race tragedy, right? Especially in KL after the general election 1969. We have a quarrel between Malay and Chinese in Kuala Lumpur. So these are the example of how actually the history of our rukun negara, right? And then of course when they want to establish this rukun negara, they establish a committee, alright, jawatan kuasa perpaduan negara, to engage with all the academics and one of the father academics, politician, to draft what is suitable national ideology that we should uphold. And that's why it comes with the idea on rukun negara, right? And of course, Tan Sri Ghazali Shafi'i, one of the main architect of rukun negara. Main characteristic of rukun negara here, he said that is the emergence of a new attitude based on conscious thought, emphasizing a rational, even if abstract structure of law and order. Okay, so of course, when you have rukun negara, right, this is to create another important attitude. Okay, we need to think rationally, okay, as a citizen, and of course we need to obey the law and order. Okay, so that's the idea behind what we call as the rukun negara. So it's very crucial for all people in Malaysia to uphold their rukun negara in order to become a guiding principle of their life, right? In terms of how they obey the power, how they obey the rule, how they obey the constitution, and also how they are respecting each other, right? So you need to have the good behavior in your life. And of course, they should be regarded as pillar of nation. Okay, the nation must be firmly established upon all the pillars of Rukun Negara, which it will be duty for everyone to uphold and defend. All the pillars are equally inviolated and necessary to maintain the equilibrium and structure, not even of the nation. So here, what it mean by Tan Sri Ghazali Shafi'i? He was our foreign minister during Tunku Abdul Rahman's time, the first prime minister. He said that it's very important to achieve a greater equilibrium. Means that the idea of balance, right? We need to uphold Rukun Negara for the sake of maintaining peace and harmony. Plus, we also need to maintain our what we call as the equilibrium, okay, or maybe the moderate nation, the structure of the nation. So that's why Rukun Negara is a very important ideology that should be upheld by the people of Malaysia, right? So that's a bit about what's the idea behind Rukun Negara. Alright, jadi Rukun Negara ini untuk makluman semua, dia adalah lebih kepada selepas Malaysia mengalami tragedi 13 Mei. Di mana masa tragedi 13 Mei itu kita tahu ada rusuhan kaum selepas pilihan raya, pemilu di Kuala Lumpur dan juga dia merebak ke setengah kawasan di Semenanjung walaupun kebanyakannya di Kuala Lumpur. Jadi disebabkan oleh itu kerajaan semasa mengisytiharkan darurat or emergency, government plan to introduce the idea of rukun negara, okay, to unite the people, okay, not just in politically but also in terms of their ideology. Okay, sebab negara sudah berada dalam keadaan ketegangan kaum sewaktu itu. Dan apa punca ketegangan kaum itu, ada banyak faktor untuk makluman semua. Okay, pertama of course dari segi keadaan ekonomi ketika itu, di mana keadaan ekonomi ketika itu lebih banyak dipelopori, dikuasai oleh golongan bukan Melayu. Okay, dan juga sudah ada ketidakstabilan dari segi politik, okay, yang menyebabkan berlakunya peristiwa 13 Mei itu. Terlalu banyak sebenarnya perkara yang berlaku yang menyebabkan akhirnya kerajaan berpandangan, okay, dan proses ini adalah semasa dalam emergency dan mageran, di mana Malaysia, di mana kerajaan berhasrat untuk memperkenalkan rukun negara. Salah satu arkitek utama ialah Tan Sri Ghazali Shafi'i, dan another one that I will introduce after this is the example of Prof. Khoo Kay Kim. Dia terlibat secara langsung dalam mendraft rukun negara. Okay, jadi this is the main characteristic of rukun negara. Right, next, right, upholding the constitution. Okay, so this is about the one out of five national pillars that we uphold. Okay, is number 3, upholding the supremacy of the constitution. Okay, ataupun keluhuran perlembagaan. Ini adalah prinsip yang ketiga, the third principle, okay, to our constitution, okay, to our rukun negara selepas kepercayaan kepada Tuhan, kesetiaan kepada raja dan negara. So in my lecture I will focus more on the idea of upholding the supremacy of constitution. Right? So according to Tunku Zain Abidin, okay, he says democracy is more than just voting once every 5 years. It's about always seeking to uphold federal constitution and living according to rukun negara. So what he tried to say here is that we as a citizen of Malaysia, we need to uphold the federal constitution, and our life guardians must be in accordance to rukun negara. Okay, we must believe in God, number 1. We must respect our rulers, uphold our constitution, right? And then we also need to abide by rule of law, right? And finally, we need to have a good behavior, right? So these are some guidance for us in our life. So federal constitution and rukun negara shall be read together, right? And of course, when you discuss about the idea of supremacy of constitution in Malaysia, it clearly stated under Article 4 of the Federal Constitution. Okay, whereas in this article, they say that constitution is the supreme law of the land, and any law inconsistent, invalid on part of it inconsistencies. So here what we say in Malaysia, okay, federal constitution is the highest law. Okay, regardless of any aspect of law, even Islamic law also need to be read together in line with federal constitution. Okay, so that's the basis of the idea about the supremacy of constitution. In Malaysia, federal constitution is written, and of course it is only one document, and it is the highest law in this country. Okay, so any other laws, even international law, Islamic law, also must be read in line with the provision in the federal constitution, right? But of course, when we discuss about supremacy constitution, theory, of course, different from the practical. Okay, why I say that? Because there is a lot of issues, a lot of conflicts that exist due to the constitutional supremacy, right? Number one, of course, when we discuss about our constitutional supremacy, we need to trace back to our history. Okay, number one, of course, we have the social contract. Okay, and this social contract was actually is not the formal contract that we believe, but the social contract is actually become the fabric of this country, where when we want to establish Malaysia, there are certain social contract that been agreed by our leaders to protect the interests of every people or every races that live in Malaysia, right? For example, what's the example of social contract? Of course, number one, in terms of our give and take among races. Okay, in Malaysia, okay, we give the citizenship to non-Malays, to Chinese, to Indian, to other races, and in return, right, for the Malays, of course, non-Malays need to accept the Islam as a religion of federation, number one, right? Number two, we need to accept that, okay, about our Raja-Raja Melayu, right? And then also certain Malay privilege, especially Malay and Muiputra privilege under Article 153. So there are some give and take there. Okay, ada bertolak ansur di antara kaum. Okay, Islam can be religion of federation, but other religion can be practiced freely. Okay, but of course, the most important issue here is that everyone, do Malaysian currently accept their social contract? Okay, long time ago, of course, from time to time, we are actually respect what is the meaning of the social contract. Everyone can tolerate among races, okay, different religion, and even in 1950s, 60s, 70s, okay, there is normal for us to have a friends from different races. We are working with other races, okay, in politics, in economics, and also in education. But what happened now? Okay, because now we are facing the conflict of understanding between races, religion, and don't forget also in terms of generation. Okay, some of the younger generation now, they are try or they are intend or somehow they are trying to provoke certain situation about the validity of the social contract. Okay, some will say that okay, we need to relook back to our social contract. Okay, because previously, after 1969, we have dasar ekonomi baru that much focus to improve the economic growth, especially among the majority community, right? Like, for example, like when we discuss about the the what we the different interpretation of how we understand social contract, especially when it comes to economic cake. Okay, we give a bigger slice to those to the majority religion. What about the minority one? Okay, now we are facing the issues of the economic imbalance among races. So how we going to deal with this imbalance? Okay, and even after 20 or 30 years, uh, some would say that we fail, not fail entirely, but also we fail to increase the economic wealth for the majority race. Okay, so these are some issue and some concern. And for non-Malays, of course, they are trying now to question the existence of social contract. They want to have fair and equitable share in these countries, including political participation, for example, right? We need to be more inclusive. Okay, we need to assist everyone regardless of their race and religion. And when it comes to this younger generation, we need to know that the thinking of this generation are totally different from the old generation. Because for the old generation, they are facing all the struggles, they are involved in war, in a conflict. But now the current generation are being of course we are dealing with what we call as the IT generation. All right, the Gen X, Gen Y, Gen X, Y, Alpha generation, which they have some different, what we call as in interpreting what is the meaning of social contract. So these are the aspects that we need to question ourselves and also to observe carefully what will happen to the next generation. Right. Number two, when we discuss about constitutional supremacy, we are also facing the idea about the law that in conflict with federal constitution. Right. For example, we have certain laws, like Sedition Act. Okay, Sedition Act is a one of the, I can say the one of the draconian act that restrict the freedom of speech in this country. Okay, the problem of Sedition Act, of course, it will be easier for the prosecution to prove the case against you, not just based on your intention, but based on what you write, what you uttered. Okay, so this is the dangerous of the Sedition Act. Okay, the dangerous of the Sedition Act, it will punish the people without going to have what we can say the full trial or the fair trial in court, because the word that being used can be used against you. The word you uttered can be used against you. So that's the problem of Sedition Act, because historically, Sedition Act was used to curb the influence of communists in 1950s. But some quarter they used Sedition Act to arrest um, or to threaten the political opponents. So these are the problems and the issues related to Sedition Act, whereas it will be in conflict with Article 10 of the Federal Constitution. Right. Next, we also have the issue on the recent one, 3R issues, race, religion, and royalty. Right. So these issues are actually become the most concern currently in Malaysia, especially when we can see several years and it becomes spark after the general election, okay, where certain parties are actually lost in the general election and they try to use the 3R issues, okay, to attract the voters, especially the Malay voters, right? So these are also the major concern about the laws that restricted our freedom of religion, okay, and also freedom of speech in our country, right? So that's about the issue on the restriction of the freedom. Okay, next, the issue of the ouster clause in legislation. Okay, for your information, when we discuss about ouster clause here, it means that the ouster clause referring to the clause, the provision in our law that exclude the court to make judicial review, right? And of course, these are some issues like in some cases, Robin Jyoti, the case of Nivesh Nair, right? So here, the court take the approach that this ouster clause was against the Article 4 of the Federal Constitution in the aspect of constitutional supremacy. So we cannot exclude the role of court in giving interpretation to the law. And some also, they're also concerned about the court's judgment in human rights cases. To what extent they allow certain freedom? Do the court become more liberal or more restricted approach? Okay, so these are some issues that involve our court. Right. Next, what are the issues that deals with constitutional supremacy? Another issue also concerned with the issue on Islam in federal constitution, right? As you know that Article 3 was inserted into our federal constitution at the last period of time, where we want actually to include Islam as a religion of federation. Okay, but other religion can practice in peace and harmony. Okay, so we cannot just simply read Article 3 only part Islam as region of federation, but we must also read the holistic way, read in the whole context, whereas other religion can also practice freely, right? And another concern about Article 3 also, okay, there are also the issue of the conflict of jurisdiction between civil and Sharia court. Okay, whereas civil court cannot interfere with the matters that belong to Sharia court, Article 121(1)(a). And of course, Article 3, I just forgot to include here that even though Islam is a religion of federation, but other religion can be practiced, but Article 3(4) says that this article cannot derogate the other articles. Okay, which means that Article 3, Islam in federal constitution only limit to the practice that is ritual and ceremonial based. And that's upheld in the case of Che Omar Che So, right? Che Omar Che So is one of the landmark case to limit Article 3, the word Islam in the federal constitution, only to the ritual and ceremony. You cannot simply put Islamic law higher than the federal constitution, right? Because of the historical background of um, the law in our country during, especially during the British intervention until we achieve our independence in 1957. And another case that's also very important to highlight here is the case of Indira Gandhi. Okay, whereas in this case, the federal court held that Article 1211A did not curtail the power of court, especially the federal court, to adjudicate the matters pertaining to constitutional issues. Okay, in Indira Gandhi, of course, court declared the act of the registrar of Mu'allaf to have the unilateral conversion is against the federal constitution. Okay, and in this case, of course, they argue that the religious authority should act in accordance to the federal constitution. So this is another conflict, another important issues when we will discuss about constitutional supremacy, right? And another one that's also very important, I think this is also another controversial issues, is the idea on basic structure doctrine. Okay, what do we mean by basic structure doctrine? Structure doctrine means here that court can strike out constitutional amendment that violates basic structure of constitution. So it is a duty of judiciary to strike out any legislative effort to amend constitution that violate the basic structure. So what is the basic structure of constitution? Right? There is no clear cut on this, but what we can argue about basic structure of constitution in Malaysia includes number one, separation of power. Okay, we have the separation of power between executive, legislative, and judiciary. Okay, number two, we also need to discuss about the division of power between state and also the concurrent list. And of course, because of this kind of basic structure, the court take a very different approach. Okay, at one part, court actually disregard the basic structure doctrine because they say that basic structure doctrine is the alien doctrine that import from other countries, and we have the constitution that we need to amend according to the provision under Article 159. Okay, but the recent one everyone need to know that the court are tend to focus or tend to agree with basic structure doctrine to avoid what? To avoid the possibility that the legislature will violate the constitution and also to make law that against the basic structure of the constitution. So that's why I put there the idea of pendulum moves around agree or disagree by the apex court. Okay, so we need to wait for the next development, whether the basic structure doctrine will be upheld or not by our federal court, right? So that's about the basic structure doctrine. Okay. Next, I think this is also another important issues that exist in 2016 and 17 when we discuss about Rukun Negara. Okay, there was a suggestion by Professor Chandra Muzaffar, a prominent academician in Malaysia, to insert Rukun Negara in the preamble of the Constitution. Okay, because in Malaysia we don't have what we call as a preamble like in US Constitution, okay, because we are actually okay, that we are actually the Constitution actually just go straight part one, we discuss about Article 1. There is no preamble in our federal Constitution. So Sandra Muzaffar suggests that we should include the preamble, the Rukun Negara as our preamble. And of course, they get the mix. What he suggests get some mixed responses. Okay, number one, of course, they agree to include in constitutional preamble due to the idea to encourage better race relation. Okay, because recently we are facing the crisis among the race relation in our country. Suspicion that has been created by some of our politicians, all right, to actually to make the gap getting bigger. Okay, and that will affect our race relation. Number one. Number two, okay, the idea to include Rukun Negara's constitutional preamble is based on the philosophy of the country's existence. We want to include our national ideology into the preamble of our constitution to uphold our sanctity of federal constitution. And then number three, we need to avoid further conflict on misinterpret version of constitution only to particular groups. So these are the agreed, those who are pro the Rukun Negara in the preamble of the Constitution, right? And on the other part, there are also some disagreement, okay, of certain quarter of people to include Rukun Negara in our federal Constitution. Because number one, of course, there are issue of constitutional supremacy in Article 4. Okay, when we insert that as a preamble, do the preamble will against the constitutional supremacy, right? This is number one. Okay, number two, whether there is a possibility that all religion will treat equally. Okay, sedangkan in our Article 3, we say Islam is the religion of federation, right? And then, of course, it will promote vexatious litigation and ultimately cause more racial polarization. It will have reverse effect, okay, when we include the preamble of the Constitution. And unfortunately, that discussion only stopped in 2017-18, and this idea to include preamble in Constitution has been left out even until today. Right. So that's some issues or some concern about our Rukun Negara. Right. And I think the final one, the future and hope is that when we discuss about Rukun Negara, it's important for us to create awareness to younger generation about Rukun Negara and Constitution. And I still believe, I still remember when I was in Standard 1 in 1989, in every assembly, in school assembly, we will always what we call as uh, read our Rukun Negara. Kita angkat ikrar Rukun Negara, kita baca Rukun Negara dan sebagainya. But I do believe now we are not doing that. okay, especially during school assembly, right? Then this is what we need to include, or we need to ensure the our current generation alert about the idea on rukun negara and also constitution, right? And then number two, everyone, we need to understand the constitutionalism among societies. We just cannot simply understand constitution as it is. We need also to include what do you mean by constitutionalism, the spirit of understanding the constitution. Okay, so these are the aspects that we need to look into. And with the to end my session, okay, it's very important for us to observe whether is there the potential of rukun negara to become, to promote our country to become a full negara bangsa. And this is a remain a question mark, because these are the longer process, okay, and it involves everyone to deal with the issues about whether how we want to create a one bangsa Malaysia for the betterment of our future, especially in this country, right? So I think that's it, right? About the Rukun Negara, the uphold supremacy. So these are all my references. Okay, one of a very good book to read about Rukun Negara is by Edin Khoo, Selayang Pandang, a brief introduction of Rukun Negara, because Edin Khoo elaborate further about Edin Khoo is actually son of the Professor Khoo K.K. Mudraf, our Rukun Negara. And in his book, he actually explained more about the um, the history background about Rukun Negara. Right? So there are some articles there you can read further. All right. So I think that's it, Pak Gumilang. So that's my short lecture about Rukun Negara. And if you have any other questions in the Q&A, so you can ask me after this, and I'm happy to receive any question and talk from everyone. All right. Thank you. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam. Wah, sangat very interesting ya Pak Tuan Akmal. Sangat jelas tadi bisa di screen screennya bisa di down dulu. Saya akan nyapa Miss Nini Yasmin sudah join. Uh, Mana Miss Nini Yasmin? Selamat join mana ya Ibu Yasmin? Halo. Tadi udah join kata. Ini ya Bapak Edi. Oke, di sini sudah masuk beberapa pertanyaan buat Tuan Iqbal eh, dari pemaparan tadi. Tapi sebelum kita mulai ke Miss Yasmin, kita sesuai dengan apa namanya slogan ALC yaitu Enjoy Relax ya. Jadi kita coba eh, seling dulu dengan lagu yang kebetulan ini lagu ini eh, sebetulnya tidak ada relevansi dengan Hari Kesaktian Pancasila, tapi ini berkaitan dengan merah putih, tapi dinyanyikan oleh orang Barat. Ya, sebentar.
Baik, screen saya.
Masih belum muncul. Sebentar, ini lagi orang Malaysia
Halo,
tuh
cek cek.
lagi pusing-pusing. Bentar, belum muncul. Nah, ini clear, udah clear. Silakan.
This meeting is being recorded.
Silakan, Miss.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. Yeah, good afternoon everyone. Before I'm to be a speaker of this conference, so the theme today is the constitutional values transformation for young generation. So it just means that I would like to share about the implementation for us are for the young generation. Wait, the
Wah, sinyalnya
screen
kayak
is loading. So.
sinyalnya timbul tenggelam.
Yeah, problem.
Silakan lanjut.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so okay, thank you, sir. So actually, the Constitution is different from the basic law due to an error in people a few regarding the Constitution in modern countries, so that the meaning of the Constitution is then equated with the basic law. This is error. This error is caused by the influence of the codification ideology, which requires all legal regulation to be written down. In order to achieve the legal unity, the legal simplicity, and legal certainty. The influence of the codification ideology was so great that every legal regulation, because it was important, had to be written down. And the written constitution was the constitution. So there are two types of constitution. It's namely the first, the written constitution, and the second, the unwritten constitution. Almost all countries in the world has a written constitution of basic law. In Indonesia, it's called that Undang-Undang Dasar 1945, and which generally regulated the formation, distribution of authority, and how the state's institution work, as well as the protection of human rights. The countries that are categorized as a countries that do not have a written constitution are England and Canada. In these two countries, the basic rules for all states institutions and all human rights are found in custom and are also scattered in various documents, both relatively new and very old documents, such as the Magna Carta from 1215, which contains guarantees of human rights of the British people. Because of the provision regarding statehood and scattered in various documents or only exist within the custom on society, England is included the category of countries that have an unwritten constitution. So, in Indonesia, the constitution of Indonesia it's called Undang-Undang Dasar 1945. And the constitution of basic law in the entire constitutional a constitutional system of a country in the form of a collection of regulation to form and regulate or govern a country. Indonesia itself has the constitution. It's called the 1945 Constitution. So we know that in Indonesia we have a Pancasila, and the Pancasila is the identity of the constitution. And we know that beside Pancasila is the identity of constitution, Pancasila is also the grand norm. So every law in Indonesia is made based on the Pancasila as a grand norm. The preamble to the 1945 Constitution, which contains the foundation of the Pancasila states. The preamble is very important because it contains the foundation of the state's Pancasila, comes from the values of the Indonesian national itself, which have existed since time immemorial long ago, before the Indonesian people established a state, which was the form of traditional values, the customs, culture, or religious values. Apart from that, in formulating Pancasila, the founder of the nation is also talk about the felt what their nation experienced during the time, the colonial period, and remember what they once fought for and the dreamed of as a source of liberation, happiness, and shared identity. So the existence of Pancasila as the preamble of 1945 Constitution is as constitutional identity. So, this is the Pancasila. The Pancasila has five principles of the Indonesian states. The first, belief in the one and only God. And the second, a second and civilized humanity. And the third, the unity in Indonesia. And the fourth, democracy led the wisdom of representative of the people. And the fifth, the social justice for all Indonesian people. Let's see how Pancasila is implemented in the current era of the younger generation. So, uh, mostly the member in this conference, and also I also, because I come from the law department, from the law faculty, to study the application of Pancasila in era of younger generation. I will study it from the phenomena of legal cases that are currently occurring related to the principle of Pancasila one by one. The verse about the violation of the first principle of Pancasila is first belief in one and only God. So, about the belief in the one and only God regarding the defense precept, of course, the scope is very broad. But if we talk about divinity, of course, it is related to religion. The article of 1945 Constitution, which regulates religion, is Article 29 of the 1945 Constitution, which contains the verse: "The state shall be based on the one and only God." In the second article, the state guarantees the freedom of every inhabitant to embrace his or her respective religion and to worship according to his or her religion and faith as such. So I will take the violation of religious freedom in 2022 until right now. It's increased compared to the last year. So the three trends in that's I will take one article to explain about the violation of religious freedom. So and there is one institute in Indonesia. It's called the Setara Institute. It released a report of the condition of freedom of religion and belief. It's called KBB. It means that the freedom of religion and belief in 2022. It is referred 175 incidents of violation about violation of religious freedom were recorded with 333 actions in Indonesia. The figure has experienced that slight increase compared to the year's finding, and namely 171 incidents with 318 KBB violations. The religious freedom of belief researched at the institution said that 168 actions were carried out by the state actor, and while 165 actions were carried out on the non-state actor. And then, this is called that in Indonesia, it's still there is a lot of violation about religious freedom. For example, attacking church and the other. So this is problematic because of the constitution basically provides that guarantees about the freedom to religious. And the second, this is about the second principle of Pancasila, a just and civilized humanity. So, wait. The most cases of violation of this second principle are sexual violence. The first, molestation of minors. Minors is a child, or also the underage is under 18, under 16. And the second is rape. And based on my research until 2023, 9,645 cases of sexual violence occurred in Indonesia throughout 2023. And the Ministry of Human Empowerment and Self-Protection noted that the number of cash violence and criminal acts against the children is reached 9,645 cases. This has happened throughout January until May 28, 2023. So this is wow, this is a lot. Um, if broken down by tape, the cases of sexual violence against the children are in the first place with 5,280 cases. Then the follow with the physical violence with 3,100 52 cases, and psychological violence with 3,053 cases. Um, based on the below, the media Indonesia has summarized the number of cases, violence, and criminal acts against the children based on the data from the Ministry of Empowerment of Women and Children. So there are female victims, male victims, physical, sexual exploitation, trafficking, neglect, and also the other. So most recently, in the rape case of a 16 years old girl, for example, in Parigi Central Sulawesi, have become a serious concern from the National Police Criminal Investigation Unit. This certainly encouraged the National Police Chief, General Police Sigit Prabowo. Yeah, and also a lot of case and see this is about the violence, molestation of minor, and also rape. So, the third is the principle of Pancasila of unity in Indonesia. About the unity in Indonesia, the one example of violation of the third principle is the Free Papua Organization. Free Papua Organization, a movement which is now known as the Armed Criminal Group. The separatist movement has been established since 1965 and exists today in Papua and West Papua. Their goal is to separate themselves from the unitary state of the Republic of Indonesia. Is fighting from their desires. This group often commit criminal acts that result in loss of life. Now, infrequently, women and children become victims of Free Papua Organization brutality. And until now, the Free Papua organization of is still difficult to overcome because they are equipped with complete and up-to-date weapons. They also hid in the mountainous region of Papua. And then, wait, and then the fourth is principle of Pancasila is democracy led by wisdom of representative people. So the restriction of freedom of expression are an example of violation of the fourth principle. In 2021, the Commission of Missing Person and Victim Violence recorded that 26 cases related to government steps in efforts to limit freedom of opinion and expression. The case that attracted the most public attention at that time was a mural allegory of President Joko Widodo face whose eyes were covered with the word for handed for not found in the internet. And in the city of Tangerang City Police also acts relatively the hunting down the mural maker. The several witnesses have been
Nggak
questioned.
ada yang
The police
nyala.
that the hunt was being carried out because the president is a symbol of the country that must be respected. This case was finally stopped as various criticism and protests emerged in the community. The police admitted that there was no criminal element in this creation of the mural. So, however, the mural allegory of the president's face was removed and covered with black paint by the local government and TNI Polri. So, if we know about the violates Article 28 of the 1945 Constitution it's regulated in Article 28G. So that contain of the first, every person shall respect human rights of the other in order of life in society, nation, and stage. And the second, in the exercise of his or her rights and the freedom, every people shall abide by the limitation to the stipulated by the laws with the purpose of solely guarantee the recognition as well as respected from the rights and the freedom of the others, and the only others comply with just human in accordance with consideration for morality, religious values, security, and public order in a democratic society. So we reach at the last principle of Pancasila, social justice for all Indonesia principle. So, the example of violation of the fifth principle is the corruption. Corruption is really, really bad in Indonesia. So, in my PowerPoint, you can see there is an index about the corruption in Indonesia, start from 2001 until 2021. So I took this is the newest data. So I think there is no still not enough about the 2022 and 2023. So as we can see here that from the index is a really increasing. It's always increasing one by one, start from 2001 until 2021. So, based on the data from Indonesia Corruption Watch, there are 579 corruption cases that have been prosecuted in Indonesia throughout 2022. This number has been increased by 8.63% compared to the previous year, which was 933 cases. From these various cases, 1,396 people were named as suspect for domestic corruption. So, I already explained about the violation about the five principle of Pancasila, which is Pancasila is also the grand norm for about making all of the law is also in the preamble of 1945 Constitution. So in my view, the urgency of early Pancasila education for the generation Z is the latest generation in Indonesia. It's very important. This is because with Pancasila education, it is hope that the younger generation will not be uprooted from their own cultural root, so that they will have guidelines or guiding principle in thinking, the acting, everyday life based and on meaning and Pancasila values. Apart from that, the implementation of Pancasila education through social media for Generation Z is very effective and efficient. This is due to the closeness of Generation Z or Indonesian youth to social media, which is currently trading. So, my conclusion is the younger generation is still already needs to learn about Pancasila. Okay, thank you, sir. This is my presentation. So,
Oke, very very
you.
interesting. Sangat bagus sekali ya pemaparan Bu atau Miss Yasmin. Baik, di sini
Wait, I will stop my
eh,
screen sharing.
udah ada beberapa email yang masuk dari mahasiswa dari Universitas Banten Jaya juga ada, kemudian dari SA Unggul. Nah, saya cuma ambil dua saja nih, satu buat Tuan Iqbal.
Ya.
Di sini sangat bagus sekali. Ini dari Farhan, Universitas Banten Jaya, bahwa yang saya tahu di Malaysia itu pernah dengar ada 3 isme di kampus-kampus Malaysia masa lalu ya. Saya pernah dengar ini cerita yang berkompetisi yaitu sosialisme, nasionalisme dan Islamisme. Nah, bagaimana impact-nya hingga kini terhadap 3 doktrin itu? Sebab di Indonesia sendiri Presiden Soekarno pernah gagal, ya. Sebentar, ini ada yang bocor. Di Indonesia sendiri bahwa Presiden Soekarno pernah gagal menggabungkan 3 isme, ya, yaitu antara nasionalisme, agama, dan komunis, atau dulu disebut dengan Nasakom. Nah, ini ditolak oleh umat Islam yang tergabung dalam Partai Masyumi saat itu. Jadi tidak mungkin berandai kata tidak mungkin antara air sama minyak itu bersatu, ya. Jadi Soekarno awal-awalnya sudah mendapat pantangan karena dianggap lebih condong terhadap partai komunis. Nah, bagaimana impact-nya ketiga doktrin itu yang terjadi di Malaysia saat itu, sebab di Indonesia Partai Masyumi sudah tidak berlaku lagi sekarang. Nah, jadi ini saya dapat cerita, kata Pak Rani dapat cerita bahwa dulu di kampus beberapa kampus Malaysia itu berkompetisi untuk menyatukan atau eh, ada 3 isme itu, Pak Tuan Iqmal.
Oke,
Oke, nah, bentar, yang kedua, karena saya dari PIKA ini mahasiswa dari PIKA ini dari mana ya? Sebetulnya saya pernah membaca kalau rukun negara
Oh my
adalah setelah Malaysia merdeka, ya Bu. Beda dengan Pancasila, ya. Kalau Pancasila itu kan sebelum Indonesia merdeka sudah ada, ya. Lahirnya juga tahun 2028 itu sudah ada sampai kesaktian 1 Oktober waktu itu. Nah, bagaimana kedudukan negara di Malaysia dalam legislation dan regulation di negara Malaysia? Itu Tuan Akmal. Bisa dipahami?
oke,
Oke.
boleh, boleh, boleh.
Sebentar. Ini yang buat Miss Yasmin. Ini dari siapa nih? Ada namanya dari Lia. Nah, ini ada pertanyaan bahwa Pancasila sebagai ideologi, jadi Indonesia sudah 78 sampai 79 tahun Indonesia merdeka. Hingga kini Pancasila sudah teruji dengan berbagai peristiwa. Pancasila selalu menjadi penyelamat keberagaman Indonesia. Jadi tadi yang Tuan Iqbal bicara ada eh, apa Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, ya. Namun selalu ada yang berpandangan bahwa sila keadilan sosial bagi seluruh rakyat Indonesia itu belum terwujud dalam kehidupan bangsa Indonesia. Bagaimana pandangan Ibu dalam hal ini? Itu yang pertama, Miss Yasmin. Kemudian yang kedua dari eh, Hendra ini mahasiswa Setiami sini, bahwa negara Indonesia terkenal dengan beribu-ribu pulau yang sangat luas, namun memilih menjadi negara bersifat kesatuan Republik Indonesia. Sementara ada tokoh yang menentang bahwa Indonesia lebih baik seperti federasi seperti negara Malaysia misalnya. Bagaimana pandangan Miss terhadap negara kesatuan Republik Indonesia yang secara geografis sangat luas? Itu dua yang saya ambil, bisa dipahami Miss Yasmin dan Tuan Akmal. Silakan Tuan Akmal dulu, bisa
Oh,
dijawab 2 sampai 3 atau 3 sampai 5 menit boleh. Silakan Tuan.
oke, saya mau jawab soalan nombor dua dulu ya. Lepas tu baru saya balik ke soalan pertama sebab soalan kedua ni lebih berkait dengan rukun negara. Okey, di Malaysia kita tahu rukun negara ni dia ya selepas Malaysia merdeka, I think sudah lebih daripada 13 tahun merdeka baru kita ada rukun negara. Okey, dari satu segi rukun negara ni um, dia satu komponen yang sangat penting. Okey, macam saya bicara tadi masa di sekolah, kami akan baca rukun negara, kami akan faham rukun negara. Tetapi dari segi pemahaman, dari segi regulasi itu, kita harus ingat rukun negara itu dia bukan satu dokumen bersifat legal. Okay, dia bukan satu legal document, tetapi dia adalah satu yang dikatakan sebagai satu referral ataupun satu ideologi negara. Jadi dalam aspek-aspek tertentu ada setengah kes di mahkamah, walaupun ada diberitahu tentang rukun negara, tetapi dalam apa-apa saja keadaan rukun negara itu tetap bersifat non legal. Okey, rujukan kepada perlembagaan persekutuan tetap menjadi keutamaan. Okey, dan disebabkan itulah tadi kalau ingat apa yang saya bicara tentang bagaimana untuk mengikat rukun negara ini menjadi satu legal document, dicadangkan ada setengah scholar ataupun akademis mencadangkan supaya rukun negara ini dimasukkan di dalam perlembagaan persekutuan, perlembagaan Malaysia. Tetapi nampaknya memang cadangan itu dia sudah berlalu, dia tidak diterima secara umumnya. Jadi apa yang saya boleh anggap rukun negara tetap menjadi ideologi negara, tetapi persoalannya adalah dari segi pemahaman rakyat. Okey, kenapa saya kata pemahaman rakyat itu? Kerana masih ramai lagi rakyat Malaysia yang tidak faham rukun negara. Okey, mereka baca ikrar di sekolah satu ketika. Okey, tapi apabila ada isu berkaitan dengan tafsiran kepada rukun negara, wah, baru-baru ini di Malaysia ada heboh dengan perkataan liberal itu. Okey, kerana liberal itu di Malaysia dia diasosiasikan dengan sesuatu, dikonotasikan sesuatu yang negatif, macam Islam liberal dan sebagainya. Jadi orang nampak seolah-olah perkataan liberal ini satu perkara yang sangat negatif. Jadi ini yang menimbulkan dampak persoalan tentang bagaimana rakyat Malaysia memahami rukun negara. Sedangkan rukun negara ini sudah hampir sejak daripada 1970. Okey, sekarang sudah lebih daripada 50 tahun. Okey, 50 tahun lebih rukun negara ini. Jadi ini adalah satu perkara yang menjadi persoalan juga di Malaysia, tentang sejauh mana rakyat Malaysia faham tentang rukun negara dalam konflik-konflik yang ada di antara kaum, agama dan sebagainya. Okey, itu soalan yang pertama. Yang awalnya tadi soalan ditanyakan tentang ideologi nasionalisme, sosialisme dan Islamisme di Malaysia, ya. Okey, di Malaysia sebenarnya kalau dari segi ideologinya, ya sudah tentu kita tahu nasionalisme, persoalan bangsa itu didominasi oleh UMNO, Barisan Nasional, Parti UMNO. Memang dia parti yang berasaskan kepada nasional. Okey, dan juga kita ada Parti Islam Se-Malaysia. Okey, PAS yang lebih kepada Islamisme. Okey, jadi sebab dia ada gabung antara nasionalisme, antara Islamisme ini yang menjadi ideologi di kalangan kebanyakan rakyat Malaysia, terutamanya majoriti, ya, di kalangan orang Melayu. Jadi selalu ada pertentangan di antara ideologi nasionalisme dan Islamisme. Tetapi apa yang saya boleh katakan, di Malaysia sekarang ideologi yang berasaskan kepada Islamisme itu nampak lebih dominan, nampak lebih ke depan. Okey, sebab rata-rata masyarakat Malaysia ini dia lebih konservatif lah kita katakan. Jadi sebab itulah kalau kita tengok dalam keputusan pilihan raya sebelum ni, Islamisme itu sendiri sudah mula menunjukkan, menyambahkan hasilnya. Okey, jadi Islamisme itu sudah menjadi satu perkara yang diterima ramai. Okey, tapi sudah tentu apabila Islamisme ini membekar, dia tetap ada dampak, ada kesannya kepada perpaduan di kalangan rakyat Malaysia, terutamanya hubungan kaum. Okey, antara Melayu, antara kaum Cina, India, Bumi Putra, Sabah dan Sarawak. Sebab Muslim di Malaysia hanya 60%. Saya kira dia tidak sampai 90% seperti di Indonesia. Okay, tapi di Malaysia 60%. Jadi ini juga menjadi satu faktor lah yang menyebabkan hubungan antara kaum itu dalam keadaan yang lebih pada saya kira lebih mencabar. Itu yang saya boleh katakan. Jadi di Malaysia ini persaingan antara nasionalisme dengan Islamisme itu sangat kuat. Okey, sosialisme sudah tidak berapa diikuti sangat. Okey, tapi
Ya,
lebih kepada nasionalisme dan Islamisme. Dan sekarang politik berasaskan kepada Islam itu nampak lebih dominan di
betul.
Malaysia.
Oke.
Itu ada perbincangan lanjut panjang tu kaitan
Ah,
Islamisme itu. Ya,
oke.
okey, baik.
Ya, siap. Terima kasih Pak Tuan Iqbal.
Ya, baik,
Sangat
baik.
jelas. Baik, Miss Yasmin masih bisa dilanjut. Tadi beliau WA katanya terputus sinyalnya. Miss Yasmin, halo. Waduh, oke. Miss Yasmin masih bisa dilanjut? Kayaknya terpental nih beliau. Oke, Tuan Iqbal mungkin nanti di chatbox ditulis aja itu apa email. Nanti saya itu apa kolaborasikan sama Miss Yasmin. Soalnya tadi beliau bilang katanya kalau jadi ke Malaysia beliau mau ikut bisa ketemu nanti Tuan Iqbal di sana. Bisa, bisa kolaborasi baik itu artikel maupun di bidang yang lain, mobility atau apa gitu. Nanti saya mohon izin mungkin nanti ngasih nomor handphone, nomor WA Tuan Akmal ke Miss Yasmin, begitu juga sebaliknya, biar eh, komunikasi tetap berjalan, Tuan.
Ya,
Oke, Miss Yasmin masih masih join, Miss Yasmin? Wah, terpental. Memang ini Tangerang ini apalagi hujan kelihatannya. Di Jakarta beliau. Oke, closing remark aja Tuan Akmal karena memang waktunya udah azan di sini, udah waktunya salat asar sambil
oke.
nunggu kalau beliau
Di
masih
sini
bisa
Malaysia
join.
sudah hampir 4 petang.
Siap ya. Closing
Ya.
remark, Tuan Akmal, silakan.
Okey, baik, terima kasih banyak-banyak Pak Gumilang, ALC dan mahasiswa-mahasiswi di Indonesia dan juga di Malaysia atas kesudian mendengar wacana saya dengan Ibu Yasmin berkaitan dengan ideologi negara masing-masing. Rukun negara di Malaysia, Pancasila di Indonesia dan saya harap apa-apa saja kerjasama selepas ini kita dapat teruskanlah. Okey, barangkali boleh saya bicara tentang rukun negara dari perspektif yang lain pula. Okey, jadi
Oke,
saya harapkan dapat ketemu lagi lah dengan sekolah pensyarah-pensyarah, lecturer-lecturer di Indonesia dan harapan saya adalah semoga kita menghormatilah, menjunjung ideologi setiap negara dan apa yang paling penting pada saya ialah bagaimana kita di Malaysia dan Indonesia kita sangat menghormati kepelbagaian budaya, agama, kaum bangsa dan sebagainya. Okey, daripada pelbagai wilayah di negara ini. Jadi itu yang
oke,
pada saya patut dikekalkan. Kita harus lebih moderate, kita harus lebih sentris. Okey,
oke,
tak boleh terlebih kiri atau terlebih kanan. Jadi itu
betul.
yang paling penting untuk menstabilkan politik di dalam ataupun masyarakat di dalam kedua-dua negara. Okey, itu
Ya,
saja.
oke, oke,
Ya,
terima kasih Tuan Iqmal. Closing remark tadi Bu Yasmin WA katanya susah joinnya tidak salam aja buat Tuan Iqmal. Nanti bisa
okey
dilanjut
baik.
di event berikutnya. Mudah-mudahan kita bisa ketemu fisikal Tuan Akmal di Malaysia. Eh, Terima kasih banyak atas sharingnya. Nanti kita buat event lagi untuk lebih memperdalam tentang ideologi dan rukun negara. Begitu
Oh,
dari
baik
saya,
baik.
Tuan Iqmal. Mohon maaf kalau ada kekurangan. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Oke,
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi. Okey baik.
oke, sama-sama live ya, Pak.
Sudah selesai, Pak. Apakah sudah selesai, Pak?
Ngopi Pak, ngopi Pak,
Oke,
ngopi.
oke, oke, oke. Sebentar, ini tadi Miss Yasmin belum masuk lagi. Kayaknya beliau